Let's start with the definition of hypervisor, because it really is a pretty key component of a cloud implementation. The hypervisor is the virtual machine monitor. So this is really the heart of what allows us to run multiple logical machines on top of the one piece of physical infrastructure. To better understand how the hypervisor works, let's go and take a quick look at the mechanics of virtualization. We've had virtual machines around for a very long time. In fact, you may well have run them on your own physical machine. And virtualization is a pretty key tenet of the way cloud services run. Of course, there's much more to cloud than just having virtualization. We still need those cloud characteristics such as on-demand self-service and resource pooling. But when we leverage those characteristics, we're very frequently using virtualization services, particularly when we talk about infrastructure as a service. So when we look at virtualization, inevitably we do still have a layer of physical infrastructure. Back in the first module, I showed you some of the data centers of Google and Microsoft. They're still racks of machines, and that's our underlying physical infrastructure. We then have a virtualization layer. So this is where the hypervisor is able to sit there and provide an abstraction between the physical infrastructure and then logical infrastructure that sits on top of it. So this is going to be one of our virtual machines. Now that logical infrastructure means that when you do remote into the server, you'll still see a network card and hard disks and other virtualized devices. They don't necessarily map directly to that underlying physical infrastructure, but it does mean that when you're in there in the machine, it looks pretty much like a normal operating system. Because of course that's what we have. The operating system sits on top of this logical infrastructure and it supports applications that run within there. Now when we talk about virtualization, we inevitably have multiple virtual machines that run on top of that physical infrastructure. Sometimes this can be thousands of machines, and factors such as the capacity of the underlying physical infrastructure and the scale of the logical machines that are being provided will determine how many get provisioned within that one physical machine. The hypervisor is what keeps Virtual Machine 1 separate from Virtual Machine 2, because these could belong to totally different customers, and this is much of the premise of resource pooling, that other cloud characteristic we looked at in the first module. You're going to share the physical infrastructure between multiple customers. But what happens if it goes wrong? So what happens if Virtual Machine 1 is able to break out of the hypervisor, which is meant to keep it as a self-contained logical piece of infrastructure, and then access resources from Virtual Machine 2? It could be catastrophic because you could end up with one customer accessing another customer's data. This is not a hypothetical risk either. Let me show you. In 2015, we saw a very serious risk with the Zen hypervisor. And one of the things that made this risk so serious is that this is what AWS uses. Many of the customers on Amazon's cloud service are sitting on top of virtualized machines managed by Zen. The problem with this particular risk is that it provided the potential for an attacker to break out of that one logical machine sitting on top of the Zen hypervisor and access extremely sensitive parts of the underlying operating system. Now, fortunately, this was patched very quickly by Zen and rolled out very quickly to customers such as Amazon. But it demonstrated what is probably the biggest fear most organizations have about cloud security, and that is that they're sharing resources with other customers. And indeed, this is one of the reasons why models such as a private cloud, whether that be on-premise or with a provider, are often preferred to using the co-tenanted model, which is the more easily obtainable, cost-effective model. The Zen bug is probably one of the worst we've seen in terms of the impact on the hypervisor. And even though it was patched very quickly, it served as a reminder that there are some unique risks when we run services in the cloud. Incidents such as this posed a very specific risk to organizations that have decided to put their resources in the cloud. But there's another class of cloud computing risk that affects everyone regardless of whether they have put their things in the cloud or not. Let's go and take a look at some malicious cloud uses.